This episode of the Fight Block is dedicated to renowned mixed martial arts fan and frequent UFC attendee Michael Clark Duncan, who is also a student of the game himself, and also one great actor, Michael Clark Duncan. We here at the Fight Block and all of our fans, I'm sure, hope that you rest in peace.
Thank you, Matt. And I completely agree. And we missed the guy's movies. Green Mile, a classic.
Of course.
It's a good one. But yeah, so welcome to the Fight Block. This is episode number 2. My name is Jeremy. Once again, I'm the host / co-host. It's just kind of a dual thing that me and Matt are putting together. So today's agenda, got a couple topics to talk about. We're going to start off talking about GSP officially healthy. Makes his return at UFC 154.
That's great news.
Defending his title against Carlos Condit. And we're going to move on. Talk a little bit about Bellator, one of their champions.
Eduardo an unfortunate mishap, if you will.
Yep. KO'd outside the Bellator cage. Talk a little bit about that and just give our thoughts on having your fighters fighting outside your promotion and what that does to your the image of your fighters and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Give a recap of ONE FC 5.
Pride of a Nation.
Yeah, and more specifically, Tim Sylvia versus Andre Arlovski and the controversial finish. And we'll close on an awesome matchup that was just announced. Jose Aldo taking on Frankie Edgar for the featherweight championship. Frankie Edgar stepping in on short notice for Eric Koch.
Frankie Edgar showing that he is the answer for the injuries in this case, taking the fight on short notice, which ironically comes a week after he said that if he were John Jones, he would have taken the fight on short notice. So here we see Frankie Edgar putting his money where his mouth is, basically showing that he's, cashing a check that his mouth wrote, stepping up to the plate and potentially jeopardizing a full training camp to prepare for Jose Aldo. But again, ever the company man. And I think a wise decision anyways. We could always get a rematch.
That, and, I know we're going to close and talk on it more, but, this could be 3 straight losses for Edgar. And, that doesn't... What's next if he loses? But, we'll get to that. So, and we might close on some a bizarre little poll that Dana White put up, came on the well-known underground forums right after the whole John Jones issue, and posted a poll. Do MMA fans want to see Brock Lesnar versus Fedor Emelianenko? Still, because the fight was, back when Brock was champion, that was the fight everyone wanted to see.
Hint, yes.
So yeah, we if we have time, close on Brock versus Fedor. But to get things started, we're gonna go to the I guess what I'm kind of calling word on the block. I don't know, some
kind of a rumor mill or heard through the grapevine.
Well, no, word on the block. I think I'm calling it that for our comments. I don't want to call them our fans because our fellow fans, mixed martial art fans.
Correct. Gotcha.
Yeah, had a couple words to say on our first video.
I saw that.
Starting off with the good, we had our loyal
groupie.
Yes, groupie. We know him personally. Stop by, listen to our podcast video. Had some nice words to say. Wanted to say great podcast. That's from Crazy Eyes 62.
Yes, and Crazy Eyes, thank you very much for the comment, and thank you for stopping the nude pictures you were sending us too. I know you're a big fan, so we appreciate you at the end of the day. But thanks for that as well.
Yes, thank you very much. So, moving more to a in-depth comment, I want to thank Caesar the Ape God. Even though he called us idiots, that wasn't very nice. But
thanks for your comment, anyways.
Not everyone can like us, but Caesar the Ape God had this to say. He had 2 things to say. He said, one, and this is just going back to our last week's episode. We pretty much covered John Jones and the whole controversy with him. But he had 2 things to say. He said, one, that Lydell, Couture, Ortiz, Shamrock, the pioneers of the UFC, they can't compare it to Jones. Those guys never had huge global sponsorships to deal with. Those guys had to fight Jones had a hell of a lot more to lose than Sonnen, and a matter of fact, Sonnen had nothing to lose. This guy, we went back and forth a little bit. He admitted that he absolutely hates Sonnen, but pretty much he was referring to our discussion about how, how you want to your legacy and your reputation to be remembered. Everyone wants to be the guy that, will step up and fight. And, that's what fans like. The guys that will step in on short notice and take fights and, they're fighters at heart. And those are all the kind of classic guys. We see that very much in the Vitor Belfort promoting his fight now with Jones and how he's, calling himself an old school guy.
Right. I strongly disagree with his statements about Liddell and everybody. Yes, because they were pioneers maybe back in the day, it counted, but did we not just see Tito Ortiz step up on short notice against Rashad Evans, and now, on the tail end of his career after he's well set in money? I mean, he's famous enough that he's getting reported on TMZ, and while he doesn't have a Nike sponsorship, he certainly has sponsorships to worry about. I mean, we'll all know he'll have Punishment Athletics at the end of the day, but he has other ones to worry about as well. And Liddell kept on fighting quite a bit after his prime for purely the love of fighting. He probably could have made just as much money not fighting through continual sponsorships, his job with the UFC, and basically just appearances, seminars, and maybe even a budding movie career. But he chose to go on to fight, and while it wasn't on short notice necessarily, he still showed that he had that, drive, fire, and I don't want to say instinct because that sounds spontaneous, but sort of a will from within.
Yeah, I mean, Caesar goes on to say on the same topic that one thing is for certain: Jones is a winner. That's all anyone cares about. When the smoke clears, that's what got him his accomplishments by winning, not his public image. I was going back and forth saying, when you have a huge global sponsorship, your image is a big deal with the public too. You want to make sure you have a good public image because Nike doesn't want some guy with heat and a bunch of haters behind him representing their product. So I have I side with the fact that your image is a lot when it comes to these big sponsorship deals. He was saying more like if you win. Caesar was saying more if you win, you get your championships and you're a winner. That's all that matters.
Well, look at Kobe Bryant. I mean, he's rebuilt his image since then, but immediately on the tails of just rape allegations, not even a confirmed actual, sentence, he lost some immediate sponsorships, and I know Tiger Woods lost some as well. The guy, can they regain that through winning and winning and winning? Sure, but you're always going to kind of have that, have that stamp of disapproval in the public eye in some way or another. And I think that, Jones made purely a business move. He made a fighter move. So I think Caesar has a valid point for sure. But I think that Caesar's almost, it's almost like we're talking about two different things. He's arguing that fighters should be businessmen, and we're arguing that fighters should be fighters, and the business will come. And just having a regular public image, regularly positive public image and a consistently positive public image, that's something that will kind of yield more business in and of itself. And, can businessmen succeed without a positive public image? Sure, but ones who are getting paid by other corporations and companies, they need to maintain some level of a positive public image.
Definitely. I agree. And I think that's a good spot to move on. Regarding John Jones, the one other comment that Caesar had to say was he said, too, that Sonnen and Hendo are completely different fighters style-wise. And this was referring to my comment in the last episode where I said that I felt Sonnen was a weaker Hendo. And what I meant by that was they both have the wrestling background, but I should have said that Sonnen, I feel, is a weaker matchup in terms of, threat to beating Jones. And he went on to say that Sonnen will charge at Jones and immediately make it a grappling match. Hendo won't do that. KOs is the only thing on his mind.
Yeah, I agree with him that the matchup is different, but I think you guys just kind of had a miscommunication. There's what you're saying is kind of like there's no threat of, Jones's night being ended suddenly with Sonnen, right? Yeah,
no, what I was saying is, they both got the wrestling background. So obviously, Jones in his training camp is, preparing for takedowns. And when it comes down to at the end of the day, these guys are professionals. They have a wrestling background or they don't. They can stop a takedown or they can't, And 8 days, you get the Dana White coming up to you saying, hey, we got Chael Sonnen as a replacement. You got 8 days. Can you take this fight? And the fact that, we know exactly what Sonnen's going to do. He's going to try and take Jones down. And, what it boils down to is, can you stop that takedown or can you not? 8 days, watch some film footage, work on takedown defense. I think Jones would have had Sonnen easily because with his reach and his stand-up, I definitely feel he has the advantage over Sonnen on the feet. And it's just a matter of stopping that takedown. And, I feel like 8 days, I mean, Jones, that was plenty for Jones to change up his game plan,
Right. I mean, I think what you're saying was at some level with Dan Henderson, he was preparing for a takedown, even if it wasn't the primary threat. It's basically like there was a couple risks with Dan Henderson, one being the takedown and one being, the knockout power. So all of a sudden one of the big risks disappears and all he has to worry about is a takedown.
Yeah. So, I mean, but come on. Like, these guys, yeah, every fight is different, and yeah, you have different game plans and strategies leading up to fights. But come on, they train every day, sparring, grappling and sparring, standing up and sparring. They practice all these things, and so they have these weapons in their arsenal. It just comes down to whether, can you stop a takedown or can't you stop a takedown?
Right. I mean, if Sonnen had already fought at 205 and was preparing for a similar fight and had all these preparations, I think I would have understood, a little bit more. But, it's also, you're stopping a relentless takedown artist, but somebody who's hasn't been training really as far as, fight prep, somebody who's like the takedown of somebody who's coming up to a foreign weight class for the first time in, the better part of a decade.
Here's a question for you. You have a 30-day camp. You have an opponent set, and yeah, I understand the mindset of, 30 days, you're focusing on one individual. That's the only person that's in your mind. That's who you're training for. And, to switch and, on 8 days notice, get someone new, yeah, that might be a little bit hard to, to change up just mentally who you're fighting. But physically and just, you tell me this, you have a 30-day camp, you're training, yeah, there's certain things you look for in an opponent, holes in his game, but you have 30 days, you're training hard, you're training your wrestling, you're training your striking, you're pretty much doing it all, I would say, for the most part, to prepare for a fight. If what I was saying is Henderson, he's got a wrestling background, so I know, Jones was working on his wrestling. He would have been dumb if he had not, incorporated some wrestling into his training. So with that being said, 30 days, is Sonnen really that much different of a matchup to where you're training hard in a fight camp? 30 days, you're in shape, you're peaking, you're ready for a fight. Really, is Sonnen that much of a difference for you to say,
Well, technically, he probably had, he had fight camps, probably 2 months at least, maybe 3. So he was preparing for a fight, from a wrestler for a lot longer, actually. So, yeah, it's a different type of, takedown because Sonnen just, puts a lot more force behind it, whereas Henderson's a little bit less of a shoot for a double guy. He's a little bit more for a little bit more of a trip you from the clinch kind of guy. So that's a little bit of a different threat, but still, given this specific situation with what Sonnen presented and how much weaker he was going to be than when he normally fought, just training for a wrestler, I think, like you're saying, is simple enough for him to have taken the fight under the circumstances with 8 days' notice, for sure. Like I said, had Sonnen been fully prepped, different story, and I could see where Caesar has a point on that note, but given the circumstances and the situation at hand, I'm going to have to go with respectfully agree to disagree on this one, Caesar.
So yeah, if you drop your comments, we're going to try and go a little bit more in-depth. So appreciate you guys watching.
Yes.
And dropping your thoughts. So if, you listen to this episode, have something to say, drop your thoughts, and we may just talk about them in our next episode. But yeah, thank you for watching, even though you called us idiots, hurt my feelings a little bit, but
yeah, thanks for calling us dummies.
Yeah, but
keep it up.
All good,
I guess.
We cool. But okay, so moving on to our show and what we have on our agenda today. I don't know, are you excited about this? GSP is healthy, and he's fighting at UFC 154 November 17th in Montreal, taking on Carlos Condit. Good to have GSP back.
Oh, great to have him back. Great news, especially with this drought of, star power and a lot of these injuries. It's great to hear that GSP is coming back. I'm a fan of his. I know he gets some criticism, but Overall, I'm a big fan of his, and I think that his matchup against Condit is a great one. It's a little bit of that Jones-Rashad feel, although there's no sort of bitterness to it, but they have trained together before. They have worked with the same coaches, so it provides something that's a little bit more interesting than your typical fight. It's also a title unification bout. GSP had one of those before, obviously, against Matt Serra when he won the interim title by making Matt Hughes cry, basically, from an armbar. Way back at UFC 79, I believe, which is also where we saw Vanderlei and Liddell throw down. But I'm kind of segueing from the point. At any rate, really excited for this fight.
Good memory, Coop.
Yeah.
If that is correct, I can't fact check you at the moment, but yeah, no, I'm excited too to have GSP back.
One of the top 3 pound for pound fighters. I mean, that's inarguable.
But what I'm a little more excited about is the rumors that, GSP and Anderson Silva are both interested in the super fight. And I know last year there was a lot of talk of this fight, a lot of hype, a lot of excitement, but it just wasn't the right timing. And, this matchup really could be the first ever true super fight in UFC, especially if they're both champions. GSP is saying that, win or lose, he still wants to fight Silva. I mean, obviously a win would look a lot better, but I mean, when you think back on super fights and the big fights in the UFC, a GSP Anderson Silva is quite possibly the biggest. Aside from, I would say, GSP against BJ Penn got a lot of hype in it. Both were, I believe BJ, was he champion at the time?
Lightweight champ, yeah.
Yeah, lightweight. Although, it didn't live up to the hype, the fight. BJ got destroyed.
Trounced.
Yeah, but that had, big hype behind it for a super fight. And, yeah, I'm hoping this fight happens. It's one of those dream matchups, and with, Anderson Silva getting older and with his career, nearing an end, I really want to see him challenged. And I think GSP would be, a great matchup being his wrestler background and, solid submission defense. I think GSP, even though he'd be undersized, would definitely.
Yeah, I think this for sure would be, it's definitely the biggest super fight, potential.
Especially if they're both champions.
Right, because, you had Liddell, Vanderlei, and the only thing that would have been bigger than this is if Vanderlei had come over from Pride with the belt still, and he hadn't lost it to Dan Henderson, and, Liddell still had the title, and then they fought. That would have been the biggest super fight to date, and it still was a great fight, and it still was, in a way, a super fight, which is why I think this will still drum up a whole grip of interest, even if one or both men lose before it happens.
Yeah, I hope it happens, and, there's no, Carlos Condit, he's no walkover. I think he'll, pose an interesting challenge to GSP with his style. He is a very active ground fighter when he's off his back too. So even if GSP puts him there, Condit's always working from his back, and I think this is going to be a fairly tough matchup for GSP coming back, and you can't count Carlos Condit out. But yeah, if GSP wins this and unifies the belt, becomes, welterweight champion again. He already is, but, unifies it. I think a GSP Anderson Silva matchup would be huge. And there's rumors that Anderson Silva isn't, he's not fighting until 2013, he said. He mentioned he was possibly going to step up and save 151 by taking on a light heavyweight.
Light heavyweight.
Yeah. Not for a title or not to fight John Jones or anything, but he was going to step up to light heavyweight to possibly save the card. But he also said he's probably not going to fight till 2013. That might be because, you might be putting a close eye on this GSP fight. And, if GSP comes out victorious, that very well may be, Silva's next fight.
Right. Now, see, I view this fight, I'm just as excited, but I almost see it a little bit differently. I think right before, when people were first talking about it, was the best time because you had two stale divisions in a way. 170 had a bunch of contenders, but So it's always been very stacked for a while, but GSP had beat most of them. But for me, it's almost like it's a shame to see this fight perhaps almost coming to fruition at a time where, middleweight has become one of the most exciting divisions in UFC, and suddenly Silva actually has a fresh crop of legitimate challengers. And I mean, GSP has conned it. When Diaz gets back from his kind of somewhat bogus suspension, there's no reason to think why he and George wouldn't be matched up, because a lot of people think Nick Diaz should have been the title holder. And he also has kind of a grudge going with George St-Pierre. I mean, then you have guys like Martin Kampmann, who, other than a couple dumb judges, probably should have been awarded a title shot already. I mean, you have guys who are kind of always perennial contenders like Koscheck, although we'll probably never see
Hendricks is moving up the ranks.
Correct. And we have guys, who are still kind of on the cusp of a title shot, such as Jake Ellenberger. You have guys like, Shields left, but you have Akiyama, who looked very promising in his debut, kind of really lost more to a tactical retardation than to actually skill in his debut. So you have a lot of contenders there, and I don't think I really need to point out how much potential middleweight has. So I honestly think that this is a fight that'll always drum up a lot of interest. Ideally, both guys will still be champs, but even if one of them or both of them lose the belt before then, I think that almost would be sort of fitting in a way, because they would have passed the torches along in their division, maybe lost one or two fights, and then they're at the point in their career where they may never be champ again, and so they take the more exciting super fights, almost like how Randy Couture did towards the end of his career, things like that. So I do agree it would sell just a bit more if the guys both had titles, but I think that's a fight that even if both guys are on their last legs, you put that main eventing a pay-per-view, and it'll put asses in the seats, and it'll get one of the biggest, if not the biggest, buy of all time, period. I mean, we're still discussing the Brock-Fedor fight as being a huge fight, one of the biggest ever in history, and, Fedor had lost 3 in a row. Brock lost 2 in a row and looked terrible in his last win before that. I mean, it's because people care about both guys quite a bit and have a bunch of respect and, get a lot of entertainment from Brock and Fedor, and I think GSP Silva would be the same. I would like to see them take a couple fights in their divisions first, but, I know I take the unpopular opinion on that one.
No, I mean, there's definitely great fights out there for Silva. Great fights out there for GSP in their division, too. And so, this fight does seem like, it might take away from the division contenders, especially if it's like an all-out war and it puts the guy on the shelf again for a few months, then, you got all these welterweight contenders, middleweight contenders that are just hanging without fights. Look how long Carlos Condit's been on the shelf because he's been waiting for GSP. It's the same sort of scenario. You don't have your champion to defend the title in the weight class. It
must be better to vacate the belt and then prove your worth by win or lose coming back for it. That way you don't put a division on hold. Or I guess the UFC could always, purposely create an interim title.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of tired of the interims. I just wish,
Yeah, me too. If I can avoid them, I will.
Yeah.
But it would be better to have one of those than no title fights for, 6 to 8 months.
Yeah. All right, well, GSP, Silva, still all speculation and rumors, but I side with, I'd be pretty excited to see that fight. So, moving along though, we're gonna talk a little bit of Bellator right now. Bellator's getting a Spike TV deal in January, so they're moving up the popularity, I would say, and recognition. They got a really cool tournament format that they do, and but there's a downside to that tournament format, and while the tournaments are going on, they've got their champions waiting to see what the outcome is, who wins the season tournament, and thus it's nice that the president Bjorn Rebney lets their fighters, go out and fight in other promotions, make some more money. But then you got things that happen, unfortunately, like just this past week, bantamweight champion Eduardo Dantas was knocked out fighting at it was in Brazil, Chuto Brazil 33. Got knocked out by Tyson Nam, and that just can't look very good for your promotion when you got your champions going out and losing. And he's still the Bellator champion. He's still going to fight the tournament winner, but now he's got a loss on his hands. And he's supposed to be fighting the tournament winner. Sees Marcos Galvão. Marcos Galvão won the bantamweight tournament. Supposed to be fighting Eduardo Dantas for the bantamweight championship. They're saying they might push the fight back now to the debut on Spike because you get knocked out, you want to have some time for healing. But yeah, their fight's supposed to happen in November, but it may be pushed back. But yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts? Your champions fighting outside of your promotion and losing. I mean,
this is why the UFC has exclusivity contracts, and I mean, I think that's the best way to go, assuming you can provide enough fights for them, or maybe have a champions clause where the champion can't compete outside the organization, and that's in their contract or in every contract. If you win a title, no fights outside the organization, which is the safest bet. But at that point, you need Bellator to step up and provide more super fights and more super fight title shots to just worthy contenders who they sign, who are, renowned enough and worthy enough of a title shot even without winning the tournament. I think that's the only way to really kind of solve the problem.
That or it was just announced today that with the Spike TV deal, Bellator is going to be doing 6 weight class tournaments instead of 4 tournaments. They're looking to get all their championships defended 3 times a year, and thus keeping their champions active. And but yeah, no, it's a weird situation. It's a cool concept with the tournament format because you really establish who's a clear cut contender. But then again, you got guys on the shelf for a while, especially if they lose. I mean, I honestly I don't follow Bellator as close as I should just because I haven't had cable for the last year. But
you rebel.
I know. It's all about the internet these days. But are you familiar with Bellator, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay, so when they do shows, is it all tournament fights, or do they if you lose in the tournament, can you come back and still get a fight?
Well, I know that primarily it's just the tournament, but I know that they don't have purely tournament fights. So to answer your question, it's not guaranteed, but they can. I mean, you have guys get cut after tournament losses, but they hang on to most of their guys as long as you really show up and perform.
Gotcha.
The new season will allow for more fights than just what the tournament allows, and maybe one other per year, because Bellator does have other prelims to fill and whatnot as well, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it's definitely something they're working on, getting everybody more fights. Something Strikeforce should possibly take notes from too, because they have a lot of unsatisfied clientele.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I mean, respect to the president, Bjorn Rebney, letting these guys go out, make a living, and fight outside the promotion, putting his promotion's reputation and image on the line. Because I mean, you of course want your champions, defending their titles, coming off, wins. You want them to look like they're deserving of holding that championship, just to promote your championship fights. I mean, it's tough to. Yeah, it's outside the promotion, it's separate and everything, but you got a lot of your hardcore fans that follow the sport that know, this guy's coming off a loss. And
yeah, and I think that a lot of Bellator's fan base, they capture the people who have cable, but they do also capture a good amount of the hardcores who want to follow their Eddie Alvarez's and stuff, and people like that who haven't had the exposure that UFC is given a lot of these guys, and they like their alternative fighting as well.
Yeah. So
I think another flaw that Bellator kind of will have to address, that hopefully this season will too, is, you had Travis View, who they came in and brought in for just a regular non-title super fight, which is fine. You want to keep your champions busy. View's, if you don't know who he is, he's one of the most prolific journeymen in MMA. He's 68 wins, 15 losses. He's one of the most well-traveled guys. He's won against some notables. He's lost to a lot of the best fighters in the sport, Vladimir Matyushenko and Hinata Sobral, to name a couple, who Bellator also just signed, which I'm excited about that. But, he came in and beat Bellator's 205 champ, Christian Mapumbu. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he came in, he beat him via decision, and then after that it was like, okay, well, I I guess we'll do what, all the fans assumed that what was going to happen was View would get a second super fight for a title outside of the tournament, kind of like how Vanderlei had to do when he lost a split decision to Ricardo Arona. And then they basically, they rematched for the title, and Vanderlei adjusted his game and beat him.
Back in Pride.
Yeah. Correct. And instead of doing that, they just stuck View in the tournament for next year, and he wasn't really rewarded for the super fight win at all. I mean, View wound up getting knocked out in his last fight in like 25 seconds, but still, he beat the champion, and he earned the right to a legitimate title fight, which he should have gotten, and then entered the next season's tournament if he lost.
Yeah. That, or, I mean, I don't even... Do they have any sort of seeding process, or is it all random for the tournaments? Like, I guess they want to try and make sure all the talent's evenly matched, but then if you got someone like... I mean, I guess it's tough to say, oh, this guy's weaker than that guy, because, But, I mean, if you just go off record base, I'm sure you could figure out a little bit more of who's got the reputation behind them, if they're well known, and maybe, I mean, it kind of seems weird putting a ranking next to a guy's name, sort of thing, like, oh, this guy isn't as good as that guy, so we're gonna see. I don't know. I was just saying you could reward him maybe if he is in the tournament against one of the
easy fights,
a weaker guy, or a rookie, a guy that's stepping in, maybe doesn't have that many fights under his belt. Then that's also creating the mismatch. You don't want to say, oh, we're purposely creating mismatches in this sport. Yeah. Anyways, that was just a weird comment that I had, but I was trying to figure out another way of rewarding
View.
Yeah, View for if you beat the champion and you don't get a title shot, there's got to be some other way. You're rewarded for it other than
Yeah,
welcome back to the tournament. Work your way all the way through, then you get your shot again.
Yeah, they need to address that for sure. That's the primary flaw with even beyond champions taking fights outside the promotion, that's the primary flaw I see happening, because you need to keep your champs busy. Luckily for them, they had Hector Lombard, who took some super fights, and he just kind of crushed everyone, so that never really was an issue. But it's always kind of one of those nagging things, and I think just the same, you need to make super fight title fights. I say, either grant the rematches to guys who come in and beat the champions in super fights, or you just need to make all your super fights title fights. Sometimes Pride you'd see guys who weren't the number one contender get a title fight just due to timing or something like that,
yeah.
Which, in my opinion, was fine if they wanted to give the champions fights other than title fights.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I mean, that would make sense, but I know they also aren't. They're really trying to play up their tournament format and really making sure, our contenders are clear-cut contenders because they worked their way through this tournament and they deserve a shot. And, if you kind of bring in a bunch of super fight guys to fight the champions and they haven't worked their way through the tournament, it might be, overshadowing that whole concept a little bit.
Right, yeah, I know. So, I agree. I think just bring them in for super fights to keep them busy, make them non-title. But if they win, I think they should get a rematch.
Yeah, no, I think it's better if you have a champion, defending his title in your promotion and losing to another guy that's within your promotion. It makes sense. I mean, even if he's, title changes hands and you got the season, winner coming up, it's still, your champion in your promotion. But when you got the champions fighting outside and losing and coming back, still having the belt, looks a little weird, puts a little bit of an asterisk on the champion. Is this guy really worthy to hold this thing? But, also makes an interesting story, because now you got a guy coming off a loss, and it's just like, in a sense, he could be considered, like an underdog champion now, coming off a loss, which is, everyone likes rooting for underdogs. But yeah, so, Bellator, new Spike TV deal coming up, some big changes to the promotion. I think it's great for the sport that there's, in a sense, it's a minor league for the UFC. We need these other promotions. We need these other promotions getting TV time and other places for fighters to fight. And, in a way, it is kind of like as much as Bellator doesn't want to be, it's kind of a minor league for UFC to really scout and find more talent. I mean, look at Hector Lombard, for instance, coming over.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a good alternative place for guys who are on the bad side of UFC. I mean, it would be a crime against humanity, as Joe Rogan would say, if Josh Barnett doesn't get accepted into UFC after the Strikeforce heavyweight division folds. I mean, although he has kind of amended his relationship with Dana White. But it is good that you have places like Bellator to house these guys who, Zuffa has banished, like Paul Daly, who, without question, is the UFC level talent, at least Strikeforce level talent. who's, working his way towards a spot on the Ultimate Fighter and a coaching spot, and you piss Dana White off, and it is what it is, but you have guys like that, Hector Lombard. I mean, you have guys who are coming up. I mean, Eddie Alvarez, for instance, who without questions, one of the top guys at lightweight and has been for some time. You have up-and-comers like Pat Curran, really exciting guys who, like you said, there's some who are farmers, but there are also some who are clear-cut, UFC caliber already, like Michael Chandler, their lightweight champ. So I think you will see UFC kind of pick some guys off.
They've been trying to get Eddie Alvarez, or, there's a lot of matchups in the UFC. A lot of people want to see Alvarez take, so he's another guy in Bellator that UFC is probably keeping their eye on.
Oh yeah, he fulfills his next fight in this contract. He's as good as UFC bound. I mean, I'd bet the house on it at this point, at least.
Yeah. Well, moving on to similar topic of these extra outside promotions for fighters to get some recognition and some airtime, whether it be pay-per-view or Spike TV or other networks. ONE FC. It's kind of the new Pride/Dream promotion, kind of stepping in to fill that void. ONE FC 5 took place just last week. Wasn't the headlining bout, but the big fight on the card was Tim Sylvia against Andre Arlovski, and fight ended in a little bit of controversy, pretty much surrounding this open attack rule that ONE FC was implementing. It was a strange rule.
Dumb rule.
Yeah, and I mean, pretty much, what happened? I guess I'll give a quick rundown. I wasn't too excited about the Sylvia Arlovski matchup. At the point, in the career point of both those guys, I think it was an okay matchup. There wasn't much else out there for them, and this was just because of their past fight, they had the potential pretty much to have, one of the biggest trilogy fights in UFC history in just terms of memorable fights. Because their first two were, they've ended kind of quick and stuff, but, back and forth, memorable moments. But then you got their third fight that was just horrible. It was just one of the worst fights in UFC history. It was boring.
It also shows that just because it's standing doesn't mean it's exciting.
No. Yeah. So they're coming off their trilogy third fight that was just awful. And, both guys kind of at a low in their career, but working their way back up a little bit, trying to, Sylvia's trying to get back in the UFC. Arlovski, you could say, is doing the same. But, so yeah, this was a decent matchup for these guys in their point of their career. Anyways, what happened in the fight? We get to the third round. ONE FC had this open attack rule implemented, which was, on display earlier in the fight card, the Phil Baroni matchup. Open attack is you got the fighters on the ground, and you have to get approval from the referee before you can engage in soccer kicks and ground attack. You can punch and stuff, but if you're going to throw soccer kicks, you got to get referee's approval. This pretty much saves a defenseless fighter, mostly because of the Roger Huerta's recent knockout loss. I'm not sure. Was it in ONE FC also, or I'm not sure.
Yeah,
ONE FC.
It was in Asia.
Yeah, I forget what promotion it was, but he just got brutally knocked out. He was already, ONE FC. He was already dazed on the ground. The guy came up and just blasted him. It was brutal. And so pretty much this open attack was implemented as for the safety of the fighters, but it just made things really confusing.
Soccer kicks are a brutal move. You either have them as is or you don't. It's no way around it. Maybe implement knees to the head on the ground, but this rule is just, it had the recipe for disaster, and it immediately came back to bite him in the ass.
Well, so in the Phil Baroni fight, you could see that you could hear the referee saying, okay, meaning, you're okay to engage, and he used soccer kicks to his advantage, blasted the guy up against the cage, and then, jumped on him and punched him out for a TKO win. Baroni won in under a minute, and but then we had the Andre Arlovski Tim Sylvia fight, where they're back and forth, first round, second round, both guys trading, and actually wasn't all that bad of a fight.
Probably fight of the night, other than Jens Pulver's fight.
Yeah, and so you get to the third round, and Arlovski staggers Sylvia with a punch, knocks him down to the ground. But rather than waiting and getting the referee's approval for the ground attack, he goes in and he kicks Sylvia in the head with a soccer kick, and twice, and I believe it was right at the end of the round too. So it was kind of all at once confusing kind of moment. The referee stopped in, was waving it off, took some time to figure it all out, but in the end, he apparently didn't give Arlovski approval to engage this open attack, and thus the fight was declared a no contest. Tim Sylvia was given 5 minutes to recover, but he was arguing the stoppage, rightfully so, because it was against the rules. But everyone wants the guy to come back after 5 minutes and keep fighting, and he looked like he was he got rocked a little bit, but in my opinion, I can't speak for Tim, but he looked like he wasn't out of it. Like, he still looked like he was there. But yeah. What are your thoughts on the fight and the open attack rule? It was recently came out today that ONE FC has done away with the open attack rule. You don't need approval anymore, and they've made soccer kicks legal. It's now a legal move in ONE FC. You can engage and do it whenever you so please. You don't need to get referee approval, so that'll rid of the controversy that we saw in the Sylvia Arlovski fight. But
yeah, they learned the hard way, basically. I agree with you. I think, although it should have been stopped when it was for an actual fight stoppage after 5 minutes, Tim, you never know because you're not there, but, he was arguing very coherently and everything, and he seemed good enough to start again. But, who knows? I guess he maybe just wanted a bigger payday of a fifth fight. But at any rate, that
was a little bit of an awkward engagement they had at the end of the fight where they kind of embraced each other and they were talking. These guys both don't like each other.
Yeah, it was kind of like there is some sort of mutual respect there. I think even in terms of fighting, even if they don't respect each other's personal, life or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I was surprised that they didn't have guys all over it, like in the middle of the cage, making sure there wasn't anyone breaking them up. I guess, like you said, yeah, they had good mutual respect, but you also know that in heated rivalries such as this one, these guys didn't have too kind of words for each other leading up to the fight. That you always gotta side on.
Arlovski actually called that he was going to win with soccer kicks. Oddly enough.
Yeah. Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so they hate each other. They probably should have had someone on hand. I think it's because, although Tim's come off like kind of a douche before, he's never had any prior history of any behavior as far as physical violence goes outside of the ring. In Arlovski, too, he's kind of like Anderson Silva. He's one of those, really kind of humble, classy, foreign champions. He's never done anything that would make anybody think he'd, be a punk. So I think that's why nobody was there to separate him, but they probably should have, had somebody on hand just in case.
No, yeah, true. It was just kind of a weird embrace. But yeah, Sylvia probably went up to him and just like, yo, let's do this again. 5, let's make a little bit more money, this and that. Now that the dust is settled, really, there's not anywhere else for either of the guys to go. Again,
to reiterate the sentiment of importance of promotions outside of the UFC, you have two guys who, while on the downside of their careers, are still B-list guys at least, potential. Obviously Tim Sylvia's let himself go, so he may never be A-list skill set wise again, but his chin's not real diminished. And Arlovski's, his chin's, he has a suspect chin for sure, and his skill set's still A-list, so it's kind of a shame that, if ONE FC closes its doors, two talented heavyweights, may be forced to retire early.
Oh, yeah. And, but I know Arlovski said he would rather not do a fifth fight, but he's also open for a fifth fight. So it was kind of weird. He's like, nah, I'd rather not, but, if the fifth fight's what needs to happen, then we'll do that. But, yeah.
I think it's because a lot of people are viewing that fight as a win for Arlovski anyways, even if it isn't one on paper.
True. I thought the ref was stepping in to stop the fight, honestly.
Oh, me too. And that's the thing, too. Some people are saying, oh, no, it should have been a DQ, and I agree 100% with you guys. Based on the situation at hand, that should have been a DQ loss for Andrei Arlovski, and I'm a Pitbull fan. He's one of the pioneers who got me into the sport. Entertains a lot of people over the years, and With that being said, I mean, I think the reason that ONE FC has declared it a no contest, and then, with the abridging of the rules, basically should tell everyone, that's basically the company admitting in so many words that they messed up, and that, the Baroni fight, the ref didn't jump in there and kind of really do it like that. He yelled it out loud, which is what's supposed to happen. So for the ref to not have done that, it's the ref's fault. So if you look at the Roger Huerta fight, it's, Roger Huerta was way, he was 10 times worse off than Tim Sylvia at that point. Without any follow-up shot at all, he almost could have just, the ref could have called it off, basically based on, how dazed he was. But I think it just shows, depending on who your ref is, that determines whether you win or not when you have soccer kicks. And I think the company putting their fighters at the mercy of the referee was, it's just a dumb idea. You have one incompetent ref blow something already. I think that the call was kind of bogus, and it should have been a win for Arlovski anyways, because, you have Tim, who apparently, maybe wasn't, in the referee's opinion, cleared to receive a head kick because he wasn't defending himself, but then, he pops up a few seconds after what should have been the stoppage, and then, presents a clear-cut, well-thought-out argument to the stoppage in general. Obviously, Tim kind of had his wits about him, if you ask me. I mean, what did you think?
Yeah, no,
on seeing that?
Yeah, I agreed. And just to kind of close on this topic, I know you brought it up, whether, either have soccer kicks or don't. Personally, I'm not a fan of the soccer kicks. They deliver some pretty brutal knockouts, but that's exactly what they are. They're brutal, and they're dangerous, especially after I saw the Roger Huerta one. I was just like, I'm not a fan. And I definitely think, in this sport, you should put fighter safety ahead of everything, and, especially with the growing media and exposure of this sport. I mean, soccer kicks are just brutal. And I think they should. I was surprised when I read the article and said, they were keeping the soccer kicks, but it is something that Asian promotions have kind of kept in their rule set. And I know there was a promotion in Canada last year that had soccer kicks were allowed. So I mean, it's still out there. It's almost like a separate rule set from the UFC. It's almost like, in a way, you got one minor little thing that can kind of completely change your sport. So.
Oh yeah, well, Strikeforce before the Zuffa adoption didn't allow elbow strikes to a ground opponent.
Yeah, I mean, I think soccer kicks are, if you can deliver brutal soccer kicks, I mean that's a huge weapon, and it completely changes the sport, especially on the ground. And like you said, they should either do away with it or keep it. And I'm on the side of no more soccer kicks, and that's just my opinion. I know there's kicks like that are part of fighting, and you got the.
It does most closely resemble a real fight for sure.
Because you got the guys like the Gracies that argue like this isn't fighting anymore, and they've taken out so much stuff with the rules and everything. But really, that's what mixed martial arts needs in order to grow.
Be a sport and not just a glorified beatdown.
Yeah, exactly. So that being said. Not a fan of the soccer kicks. Controversial decision, but soccer kicks stay in ONE FC, and
if it happens the same way next time, it'll be par for the course, and it'll be the W for Arlovski on paper too.
Yeah, let's just hope there's no more Roger Huertas. That was brutal. If you haven't seen it, look it up. I'm sure there's a GIF somewhere you can find on one of the MMA sites or something, but it was quite brutal. But moving along. Huge news. Almost another super fight was in the making last year when Frankie Edgar was lightweight champion. A lot of people called for a Jose Aldo, Frankie Edgar super fight. And especially with Jose Aldo quickly, for the most part, cleaning out his division right now. Not a whole lot of clear-cut contenders. You do have Eric Koch. Korean Zombie, another good one. But aside from those two, division's a little bit thin right now. But yeah, Eric Koch suffered a knee injury training for the fight and had to pull out. And Frankie Edgar is cutting down to featherweight, taking this fight on short notice. And we get Jose Aldo versus Frankie Edgar, October 13th in Brazil. But yeah, this is an awesome matchup. It's a risky fight for Frankie Edgar, especially for his legacy and reputation. You got a guy who beat BJ twice, wants to win the championship, wants to defend his title, then goes on to have one of the greatest, in my opinion, trilogy fights in the UFC, just in terms of you looking at all three of the fights. First one was, the least of...
It wasn't epic at all.
No, but, I mean, it was both the guys were kind of working their way up the ranks. It was just kind of a
learning experience.
Exactly. But their second two, I'm talking about Frankie Edgar against Gray Maynard, second two fights were awesome.
Oh, must-see TV.
Like fight of the year candidate fights.
Both of them.
And so you got a guy now, but he's coming off of back-to-back losses, lost his title to Ben Henderson, and then
losses, depending on who you ask.
Yeah, two very, very close fights. Both really could have gone either way. But, I mean, stepping up to take on, top 5 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. And, I mean, this is just an awesome fight. But you lose. That's 3 in a row for Frankie. I mean, really, what would be next?
I don't think the UFC is going to see it that way at all. It's kind of like how, Martin Kempman at one point recently, I'm not sure if this is, maybe you could fact check this for me while I'm talking, but he'd lost a couple really close on, one being to Jake Shields that a lot of people thought he won, and then one just bogus one to Diego Sanchez that was on the level of Bisping Hamill, which is, neither here nor there. But, I mean, you have Frankie in his first fight with Bendo. I mean, I wouldn't really argue with you if you said that Ben Henderson won. That one was way closer. It was kind of like his first fight with BJ, There's arguments on both sides of the equation, but then his second fight with BJ, he just solidified it and showed, oh yeah, so this is, it was me who won the first one, and then this is why, more clear cut, almost like Shogun kind of doing the same thing to Machida, although he did finish him. But I mean, I thought his last fight against Ben Henderson was a win. So did, from what all the stat trackers showed that it was a win. One of them showed it was a draw, except for it said that if forced to give a victor, it would have said Frankie Edgar. Basically, every MMA media outlet out there, I've tracked the major ones. About 8 out of 10 gave it to Edgar. Dana White gave it to Edgar for what it's worth. I don't think this hurts his standing in the company at all. You saw after Shogun lost to Machida, which an even closer fight actually than Henderson and Edgar in their last one. Most major credible MMA ranking systems actually ranked Shogun above Machida, even, because, really, at the end of the day, it's like there's 3 people in the room, or 2 out of 3, who think one guy won, and then everybody else thinks the other guy won, almost. It's like, no disrespect to Ben Henderson. It was a close fight. He's a great champ, but I don't think this damages Frankie Edgar's reputation, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. No, I, along with most MMA fans, probably, when we're watching a fight, we always like to keep our own, judging scorecard. And, but I can say one thing is, after both of those fights, it's that one phrase that, comes out on occasion, and that's, I'm glad I'm not a judge. Right. Sometimes I say, I wish I was a judge, because it's, for the most part, on occasion, judging's horrible. It's got that, side reputation. But after those 2 fights, I was just like, you know what? I'm glad I'm not a judge. And both were real close. And, I can see it argued for both guys. But unfortunately, Edgar was on the losing end of both. And, but yeah, he's doing UFC a huge favor. So his career's by no means on the line at all. It's just a matter of, what's next if he does lose. And,
Yeah, he kind of gets into Kenny Florian territory. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, he definitely could go back up to lightweight. There's definitely, the division there is full of contenders and fights, and he could easily, win one or two and, work his way back up the ranks there. Or he could stick around in featherweight and, take on guys like Korean Zombie.
And Jose Aldo on a full fight camp's notice, too.
Yeah, true. Who knows how this fight goes? Hopefully it's not another close one where it's just like, oh man, rematch this one.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. Like, even if fighters kind of showed that they haven't been able to win the title necessarily, like you get a guy like Uriah Faber, who by no means is done, still one of the top guys, whether he wants to fight at 135 or 145. He just can't kind of seal the deal with the title. That doesn't mean he should retire. You saw Randy Couture. Just because his days as a champ are over doesn't mean he should retire. Frank Mir lost his last title fight, and in my opinion, even if he does beat Daniel Cormier, being a self-admitted Frank Mir fan, I don't see him ever getting another title shot. Just because I don't see him getting past the top 3-4 guys. With that being said, he's still perfectly healthy. People still want to pay to see him fight, and he still would give most of the top 10 fits. This being basically kind of an explanation for. I'm paraphrasing Uriah Faber, Frank Mir, and Randy Couture, all those guys who kind of people always push for to retire because they aren't going to win the title again. Kenny Florian was probably the only one who just did retire because of that reason. But, if a guy is healthy, I think he should keep fighting. So even if Frankie does lose 3 in a row, even if he loses 4 in a row, which he'll get pretty selective booking if he loses 3 in a row, I still see him sticking around. I see him getting treatment kind of like Yoshihiro Akiyama did, where UFC kind of realized, oh crap, we're booking this guy against A-listers and really he's a B-lister, so we're going to keep him one more time. Or Dan Hardy, another one.
Oh yeah, definitely. You do the company a favor, they got your back. So win or lose, win definitely is going to be, an awesome matchup, and I think Frankie definitely has the tools the striking, the speed to give Aldo some difficulty, especially the wrestling background too. Edgar doesn't really use his wrestling though as an offensive attack much, but we have seen
just a point scorer.
Yeah, we have seen Aldo put on his back, looking at the Hominick fight, and definitely showed that if you can get Aldo on his back, limit his striking attack. That's how a good chance of beating Aldo is by putting him on his back.
Yeah, and he's one of those guys where, you'll hear Joe Rogan say to hype a fight, he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, he may be the most dangerous on the ground, but, you figure if a guy really was that dangerous on the ground, he would use it. Anderson is dangerous on the ground, you see him use it, but, Junior Dos Santos, he has a brown belt, I believe, on the ground, brown belt on the ground, brown belt in jiu-jitsu, Jose Aldo, black belt, Vanderlei Silva, black belt, and there's a reason these guys don't use it. There's a difference between being a black belt because you put in the time and are improving your own game, and then there's a difference in application, real world application, especially when it comes to MMA. Jose Aldo may have started in jiu-jitsu, but that's not his forte, and there's a reason for it. And I see Edgar's wrestling as 5 times better at least than Mark Hominick's. So I agree with you. I think that's really a good path to victory for Frankie. Plus, he's going to have probably some more power dropping down. He's going to be, instead of being one of the smaller guys, he's going to be one of the bigger guys, or at least adequately sized.
True. Yeah, he's definitely been outmatched in size in the lightweight division pretty much for every one of his fights, and a lot of fans have been asking for him to go down to featherweight and test his skills. Dana White's been asking him to go down to featherweight and test his skills there, and finally, we're going to get to see that happen. So, Frankie Edgar taking on Jose Aldo for the featherweight championship. Huge fight announcement. Really looking forward to it. Coming to the end of our show, just real quick, kind of a bizarre little poll. Dana White sometimes makes appearance on the the well-known underground forums, and posted a poll question. Would you want to see Brock Lesnar against Fedor Emelianenko? I know all the other MMA sites pretty much put the poll up to themselves, and I think it was overwhelmingly people said yes. I don't see why you wouldn't want to see this fight, but more looking at just this whole
the reasoning.
Yeah, of Dana White just bringing this up. It was right in the midst of John Jones controversy. There's rumors that he did that just to
smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, to direct talk and interest somewhere else and away from John Jones. But also, could you see this fight happening in the UFC?
Now that Fedor is retired, and I heard one of my friends actually, who knows quite a bit about the business, he had a theory that Fedor retired partially because he finally realized that his management team was a bunch of bullshitters who, really wanted him to better themselves. And so he thought that he retired to get out of a contractual obligation, and that the reason why he's coming back so soon is not because he really wanted to retire at all. It's because he wanted to fight elsewhere, finally fight in the UFC, which is interesting. It's, I mean, again, we've heard Fedor in the UFC so many times. It's, you take it with a bunch of grains of salt, but this is the most legitimate reasoning and time and cause that I've ever seen, at least, brought to this argument. So, I mean, Fedor really is kind of representing himself management-wise right now, so who knows? And then Brock, obviously, is still good friends with Dana White, and he basically shows up once every couple months to collect a big paycheck.
Well, yeah, they had their whole Brock showing up at the Dos Santos Dos Santos Mir fight. Lesnar showing up in the crowd and making his presence known. Apparently had a face-to-face with Dana White after the show, but apparently, according to Dana White, negotiations on whatever they were speaking about went absolutely horrible, to the point where Dana White, I believe, said probably would never see Brock Lesnar back in the octagon. Talks went that bad. So that's one reason why it was kind of strange. This poll was posted, but I mean, I definitely think fight fans want to see Fedor at least fight once in the UFC before he ends his career. At least,
yeah, he's one of the guys where even if his last couple wins he ended on were pretty meaningless, he still has the skill set to give the any guy at heavyweight fits basically. He made. I mean, I wouldn't pick him over Cain Velasquez, for instance, or Junior Dos Santos, or even necessarily Alistair Overeem. Maybe a couple others here and there, but I still, he wouldn't be just easy cannon fodder for anybody just because he isn't what he was. I think when you are the greatest for so long, and you are, I mean, as of yet, there's still arguments that rank him as the greatest of all time as of now, but when you lose that aura around you, people kind of have a way of making you look a lot worse than you actually were just because you set the bar so high. So there's a lot of naysayers, a lot of doubters, but Fedor was really kind of put on a pedestal for a reason, and it was deserved. So I would like to see Fedor fight in the UFC at least once.
Yeah. Well, if this fight were to happen, I definitely think it would come from a big fight paycheck standpoint, and not in the sense of, Brock is coming back, making his return, and Fedor's coming back from retirement, giving the UFC a shot. Can these guys make it to a title shot? I don't see that for either of these guys in their career right now.
It is in a way very reminiscent to Chuck and Vanderlei fighting. A couple fights removed from their title fight. Chuck had gotten knocked out by Rampage, and then had gotten kind of beat down for 3 rounds by Keith Jardine. And then you had Vanderlei, who he lost a fight against Krokop at heavyweight, granted, but he also got brutally knocked out by Dan Henderson to end his Pride career. So neither of them were what they were, although they still had plenty in the tank, which is, I think, where we have Brock and Fedor. I don't see Brock as having much in the tank, as in the way that I don't think he would want to keep fighting. But, I mean, you have to give Brock Lesnar all the respect in the world, because he would still beat most of the top 10 guys, for sure. I mean, Fedor, too, I would think it would at least, put up a good fight. They're still top fighters, even if they aren't as much of a top fighter as they used to be.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. I really don't see why someone would say they wouldn't want to see this fight. I think, once again, if they were both to come back, it's a fight that makes sense at the point of their careers. And I like I said, I don't think it would be for any kind of contention in the UFC. It would be more for this is a dream matchup fans wanted to see, and there's still interest behind it, much like the Chuck Liddell Vanderlei Silva fight, despite the champions losing. But
ironically enough, even though Fedor was kind of the outsider and Brock was the UFC, the UFC kingpin for a little bit at heavyweight, I think that of the two guys, if they both were to fight in the UFC again, win or lose, I think Fedor, ironically, would be the one more likely to stick around for another fight or two than Brock.
Yeah, I think after the Cain Velasquez beatdown and the Overeem beatdown, I think Brock has... the
Carwin fight was kind of a beatdown.
Yeah. Brock kind of knows his standpoint in the division, where he stands. And that's that was the reason why I was a fan of Brock, is, big dude, but really he was really the underdog in a lot of his fights. And
yeah, he was kind of a bully. If he wasn't winning, he kind of didn't really like adversity.
Yeah, and so, but yeah, so I mean, we've gone a little bit over an hour. I wanted to try to keep these shows under an hour, but we're right at 105. So, but yeah, once again, thanks for listening. If you're still listening, and feel free to drop your comments. We're going to continue to try and keep this thing consistent, give you a show a week, talk about the top headlines in the sport. We got a fight card coming up soon, UFC 152, so we're going to be doing our predictions, and hopefully I'll be able to catch this pay-per-view and we can do a little recap afterwards too. But yeah, Matt, once again, thanks for joining me tonight.
Yeah, closing thoughts. I just wanted to shout out to the Philippines for holding their biggest MMA event ever, and also shout out to Phil Baroni for getting another signature win and proving once again why he is the best ever.
And stealing one of the Octagon girls when he left the, or Cage girls, whatever you call them at 1FC, as he exited. But yeah, so thanks for listening. Subscribe, hit us up on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. Matt's kind of on Twitter, but yeah. Till next week. Peace.